Just another angry black bitch. That's what Donald Trump called Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. Caught on a hot mic inside room 214, 6 minutes before millions watched the tables turn. He thought she'd fold. He thought power would silence her. He didn't know over 18 million Americans would witness her hold the line, pull the receipt, and slice through him on national television. With one red-stamped envelope and 4 fatal words. "You wrote this, didn't you?" This isn't just about politics. This is about the cost of truth and the woman who made him pay it. 12:42 p.m. The oversight chamber was at capacity, but it wasn't the cameras or the nameplates that made the walls hold their breath. It was the tension, crawling like static beneath marble columns, slithering into the cracks of carefully rehearsed decorum. Not the kind of tension that screams, the kind that waits, the kind that already knows something irreversible is about to detonate and chooses to watch instead of run. Then he entered. Donald J. Trump, 44th president, stepped across the threshold of room 214 like a returning warlord. Not summoned, not humbled, but orchestrated, as if this were a coronation instead of a hearing. He wasn't escorted. He was flanked, 4 deep. 2 lawyers in tailored Navy suits, 1 former Secret Service agent with eyes that never blinked, and a communications handler gripping a leather folio as if the nation's memory were zipped inside. His tie, blood red. His smile, smug, rehearsed, dangerous. Every flashbulb in the room seemed to dim under his presence, as if the light itself were reluctant to capture him. Behind him, an aide leaned toward a lapel mic and whispered the phrase that shouldn't have made it past the soundproofing. "Package secure. Operation underway." Across the room she sat, alone. Jasmine Crockett, congresswoman from Texas, daughter of protest and courtroom grit, didn't move when he entered. She didn't blink. She didn't rise. Her presence, quiet but unshakable, sliced through the pomp like a scalpel through silk. No entourage, no makeup team, no pageantry. Just a navy blue blazer that hugged her like resolve, hair coiled tight, a single silver pin on her lapel. TX30. She looked at Trump the way a surgeon studies a tumor, unafraid, unsentimental, already planning the incision. Behind her, aides shifted. Reporters tapped their phones with trembling thumbs. Not because they were scared, but because they knew. The way you know when lightning is close enough to hear it before you see it. The room was hushed, not quiet. Hush is louder than silence. It's the forced suppression of noise, like air being held hostage. The chairman adjusted his microphone. A stack of papers shifted. The hearing hadn't started, but the stage had already been burned into memory. Trump took his seat, slow and theatrical, as if lowering himself onto a throne. He crossed one leg, leaned back, glanced across the room without seeing anyone, and smiled. Not because he was comfortable, but because he thought he was untouchable. And then he saw her. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. Her stare was neither hostile nor soft. It was surgical, deliberate, a calculation in real time. She was documenting him, not with a pen, but with presence. He shifted, just slightly. Jasmine opened her folder, slow as breath. Inside, not 1, but 2 envelopes. One creased and sealed with a blood-red stamp. The other, unsealed, exposed, waiting. She didn't touch them. She didn't need to. Their mere presence was a threat. 12:43 p.m. The hearing was called to order. The chairman's voice broke through the thickness like a spoon-tapping bone china. Today's session will examine irregularities in campaign PSC activity, financial disclosures, and potential conflicts of interest involving former federal officials. Translation: this is about Trump, and everyone knew it. The first 2 speakers droned through procedure like shields, their words dull by design, but glances flicked like Morse code across the room. Lawyers scribbled nothing on blank pads. Staffers refreshed signal threads in real time. Trump whispered to his attorney, who smirked, then looked directly at Jasmine. She didn't react. Her stillness was her strategy. 12:46 p.m. A moment so ordinary it nearly passed unnoticed. That's when she moved. No dramatics, no clearing of throat. She simply reached down as if brushing lint from her lap, and pulled the creased envelope to the center of her desk. For a second, Trump didn't move. Then he did. His spine straightened. His foot tapped once, then twice. The crimson tie rose and fell over his chest like a flag in unstable wind. His right hand curled into a fist, the golden cufflink glinting under the chamber lights. He recognized that envelope. He knew what was in it, but he didn't know how she had it. The press gallery caught it. 3 cameras, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox, zoomed in simultaneously as if guided by instinct, as if the envelope itself had a gravitational pull. Jasmine didn't speak. She didn't need to. She tapped the envelope once with her index finger, a sound so soft it wouldn't have registered in a stadium. But here, in room 214, it landed like a gunshot. Trump flinched, just a blink, but enough. And then she looked at him, for the first time, directly, their eyes locked, 2 storms colliding midair. That's when it happened. Trump leaned toward the mic and said it. "Get her out." Not asked, not requested, ordered. His voice, sharp and cracked, echoed across the stone walls like a command issued during wartime. The room gasped. The chairman froze. A Capitol police officer shifted forward. And Jasmine Crockett? She smiled. Not wide, not performative. Just a flicker. A knowing smirk that said, "You've already lost." Because in her hand was more than paper. It was evidence. It was survival. It was his signature. And now the countdown had begun. Chairman Mike Johnson adjusted his tie, tapped the microphone, and tried to steady the ship. Static crackled, momentarily filling the chamber with a shrill hiss that felt more like a warning than a malfunction. "Today's hearing will focus on," he began, but no one heard the rest. Because just as his voice cut the air, Jasmine tapped once on her tablet. Quiet, unassuming. But beneath that gentle contact, a secure transmission began. A heavily encrypted video file, time-stamped and digitally watermarked, silently uploading to a secure server deep in a Swedish data vault. A place where subpoenas couldn't reach, and power had no passport, backup, insurance, detonation if needed. The tablet screen blinked green once. Upload initiated. She didn't smile. She didn't blink. She leaned back in her seat, shoulders loose, posture deliberate, the same way a boxer exhales just before the opening bell. Across the room, Donald Trump saw the movement, the precision, the calm, and he smirked, because he mistook preparation for weakness. He always had. He nudged his attorney with an elbow, whispered something only the mic at the edge of his desk could hear. But Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. She didn't try to catch the words. She'd already decoded the pattern. Trump always spoke just before he struck. That was his rhythm. Discredit, then detonate. But this time the rhythm was off. Because this time, she was the one writing the beat. 12:47 p.m. The Capitol clock ticked forward. The gallery fidgeted. Staffers glanced nervously at monitors that hadn't changed in 10 minutes. And somewhere in the third row, a junior journalist from the Hill texted the phrase, "Something's about to pop." Jasmine slid a second file on the tablet, fingers moving slow enough to feign boredom. The screen displayed 4 folders: Operation Moray, Internal Pack Routing, Witness C, and a 5th icon simply titled Vineyard. She didn't open any of them. Not yet. She wanted him to see them first. She angled the screen just enough. Trump's eyes, sharp, scanning, suspicious, caught the word vineyard. A flicker crossed his face. Something between confusion and fury, like a man seeing a ghost wearing his shoes. He leaned back in his seat, fingers drumming against the mahogany tabletop. Tap, tap, tap. 3 beats. Jasmine answered with silence. The kind of silence that fills a room not with peace, but with pressure. The kind of silence that tightens a chamber until even marble holds its breath. The chairman continued speaking, barely audible over the storm that hadn't yet started. He was reading legal boilerplate, phrases like precedent of accountability and scope of oversight. But no one was listening. Not really. Because every eye, every breath, every heartbeat was slowly aligning itself toward one gravitational point. Jasmine Crockett's envelope. and the screen behind her tablet. Trump's attorney scribbled something on a yellow notepad, tore it off, and passed it beneath the table. Trump didn't read it. He was too busy watching her hands, waiting to see which folder she'd tap next. She didn't. Instead, she uncapped a pen. That's all. No words, no gestures, just the click of a pen echoing through marble like a warning shot with no bullet. The gallery flinched. 12:49 p.m. The aide behind Trump, same one who whispered, "Package secure," touched the comms wire in his right ear and gave a slow nod. Jasmine noticed, but more importantly, Trump noticed her noticing. Their eyes locked again. This time there was no mask. His smirk was gone. Hers hadn't arrived. It was two gladiators staring across the Colosseum, not wondering if a fight was coming, just calculating who would swing first. Trump leaned forward, picked up his water glass. Didn't drink, just held it in his palm like a weight he didn't want to carry. His jaw tensed, his leg bounced. He was trying to control the tempo, but Jasmine had already shattered the metronome. Suddenly, without announcement, a new image appeared on the main screen at the head of the chamber. Not from the committee, not from IT. It was a mirrored projection from Jasmine's tablet. No one moved. No one spoke. Even the stenographer paused her fingers. The screen showed a still image, a wire transfer receipt marked "Confidential, do not scan." It originated in Nassau, Bahamas, passed through a bank in Dubai, and ended at a U.S. entity whose name had been redacted, except for one telltale initial left behind on the routing tag. DJT. Trump sat back, eyes narrowing. He knew that image. He'd seen it before, and he'd buried it. The chairman looked confused. "Congresswoman Crockett, is that part of your opening?" But she didn't answer him. She tapped again. The image disappeared, back to black, not to tease, to warn, because the room hadn't earned the truth yet, not until it understood how dangerous the lie had become. Trump sat up straighter. "That file was sealed," he muttered, half to himself, half to the lawyer now whispering frantically in his ear. Jasmine heard it. So did the room. And somewhere inside that sudden hush, the countdown ticked again. 12:50 p.m. 10 minutes into the hearing, and no one cared about procedure. No one was asking about policy. No one was quoting the Constitution, because something ancient had just entered the room. Not law, not politics, consequences. And Jasmine Crockett? She was holding the detonator with one hand, and history with the other. When Jasmine pulled the red stamped envelope from her folder and placed it gently on the oak desk, the room tensed as if the air itself had been vacuum sealed. Every camera tightened its frame. Every phone paused mid-scroll. The shape of it, the way the stamp bled across the seal like a wound that refused to close, it was unmistakably intentional. It was not a prop. It was a line in the sand. And yet what no one in room 214 knew, what not even her closest staffers fully understood, was that this envelope wasn't the first bomb. It wasn't even the second. Because 3 months earlier, in the quiet lull of late spring, long before this hearing had been scheduled, a package arrived at her district office in Dallas. No return address, no signature, just a battered copy of The Giving Tree wrapped in brown butcher paper, the spine broken, pages dog-eared by someone who either loved it or wanted it to look like they did. Her chief of staff almost threw it out, but Jasmine insisted on flipping through it. Maybe instinct, maybe fate. Page 14 was thicker than the rest. Glued between 2 layers of pulp was a microdrive barely thicker than a thumbnail. Encrypted, air-gapped, silent. When decrypted by an off-the-grid consultant, it revealed a memo. Faded, scanned in poor resolution, but authentic. The header was unmistakable. Eyes only. Classified. P-clip. 17B below it. A single haunting sentence circled in red ink. TX30 will be handled. Operative standing by. TX30. Her district. Her seat. Her. She stared at it for a long time that night. Not with fear, with calculation. If someone in the shadows had greenlit an operation targeting her, whatever handled meant, they didn't just underestimate her. They'd just drawn their own battlefield. She printed 3 copies. One went into a safety deposit box in Queens. one into a secure folder on an encrypted thumb drive carried by her most loyal aide. And the third, she slid into an envelope, stamped it blood red, and locked it in a drawer until the day she would need it most. That day was today. So when she placed that envelope on the desk in room 214, it wasn't for shock. It was notice, a signal. Not just to Trump, but to whoever wrote that memo, whoever whispered operative standing by, and whoever thought a quiet threat could erase a loud truth. And Trump, he knew it. The moment his eyes locked on the edge of the seal, something behind his gaze shifted. Not fear, not yet, but recognition. Like a man being haunted by a ghost no one else can see. Jasmine didn't move. She let the envelope sit there like a mine waiting for weight, because this wasn't just about its contents. It was about the time bomb behind it. Because when you hold back for long enough, when you let the dam rise behind walls of silence, the explosion isn't noise, it's clarity. That memo wasn't the only file on the flash drive. There were voice memos, pixelated screenshots, redacted maps with partial coordinates, one folder labeled simply Moray. She hadn't opened it yet, not fully, not until she could do it in the light, not until the cameras were watching, not until power was forced to witness its own reflection, but someone else had seen it. A week after the book arrived, Jasmine's home Wi-Fi lit up with 10 brute force attempts from foreign IPs. Moscow, Dubai, 2 from within Virginia. Her security team brushed it off as standard congressional cyberpoking. But Jasmine wasn't naive. When enemies circle your inbox, they're rarely looking to read. They're trying to delete. She switched phones, changed her routine, stopped jogging alone. Every movement, every folder, every calendar entry became a breadcrumb laid carefully, not for escape, but for exposure. The day she boarded the flight to D.C. for this hearing, she carried only one physical item, the red-stamped envelope. No backup, no briefcase, no papers. Just that one object, sealed, weighted, lethal in implication. Because the power of a threat isn't in how loud it screams. It's in how calmly it sits in plain sight, daring you to pretend it's harmless. And Trump? He was pretending. He leaned back again, arms crossed, wearing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes, a smirk that cracked at the corners every time Jasmine tapped the tablet. His lawyer was whispering again, this time faster, urgent, and still, Jasmine said nothing, because she wasn't here to speak first. She was here to end the lie that had been breathing unchecked for years. And she knew, deep in her marrow, that if she peeled back this envelope at the wrong moment, it would be dismissed as theater. But if she waited, if she let him attack her first, then every word inside would become a mirror he couldn't shatter. 12:52 p.m. The envelope was still untouched, but its shadow had already spread across the chamber, and beneath her blazer, in the lining of her jacket, tucked beneath a seam only she had access to, was a second copy. Unstamped, plain, waiting, because Jasmine Crockett didn't come to play chess. She came to flip the board, and behind her silence, beneath that envelope, was a truth so sharp. It had waited 3 months for its moment to bleed. 12:46 p.m. Trump raised his hand, not slowly, not dramatically, but with the exact precision of a man who expected the room to respond like a machine he owned. Like muscle memory from years of barking orders in boardrooms, ballrooms, and back channels, he pointed toward Jasmine and said, "Get her out." His voice wasn't loud. It didn't have to be. It carried with the weight of entitlement, echoing like a gavel he believed was his to wield. It was the tone of someone who had never been told no in a room that mattered. The chamber froze. Even the marble seemed to pause. Microphones crackled under the strain of that moment, an awkward hiss that made every breath feel like static. The press gallery jolted upright. Cameras zoomed. Chairs creaked as tension spread like smoke. One Capitol police officer flinched forward. Another shifted near the far exit, hand resting lightly on his sidearm. For a breathless second, the room teetered on a dangerous edge, like history trying to decide whether it would stumble or stand. But Jasmine Crockett didn't move. She didn't rise. She didn't even blink. Instead, she lifted her left hand, palm forward, still, poised, and spoke in a voice that didn't rise, didn't tremble, didn't ask permission. Before I go, she said, let me remind this body of Section 112 of the National Security Whistleblower Act. The sentence didn't land like defiance. It landed like law. It was the kind of statement that turned camera operators into witnesses and turned an attempted silencing into a trigger. The officer paused mid-step. Even Chairman Johnson blinked. Jasmine reached beneath the folder again. This time, she didn't pull out the blood-red envelope. That one had already done its job. This time, she retrieved something more dangerous. A second envelope, unsealed, stamped across the top in black. Operation Murray. Bold block letters, military style, cold and clinical. She held it in one hand, then placed it gently on the center of her desk. Not thrown, not waved, just placed, like a scalpel onto an operating tray. Trump leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrowing. He recognized the name. That was clear. The mask slipped for just a moment, enough for the gallery to see not confidence, but calculation. He knew what Operation Murray was. He just didn't know how she had it. Jasmine tapped the top of the file once, then again, then slowly opened it. The first page wasn't printed in Times New Roman. It was courier font, government style. 3 lines at the top, all caps. Department of Energy, Joint Intel Sharing, Protocol Level 4, Clearance Required Project Code, Moray, Focus Domestic Containment. A hush fell over the room again, not just silence, alertness. You could feel the phones being muted, the emails forgotten, the journalists forgetting to tweet. Because when a member of Congress begins reading from a classified op order, one tied to domestic containment, it no longer feels like a hearing. It feels like a breach. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even look up as she read aloud. Page 3, Section 7A. If TX-30 becomes a liability to forward asset operations, strategic interruption protocols are authorized without formal authorization from the Office of Legal Counsel. Gas scattered like birds taking flight. The phrase strategic interruption had only one meaning in intelligence slang: silencing, neutralization, erasure. Trump slammed his palm on the table. This is fake. That's classified. You can't. But his voice cracked mid-sentence. Not from rage, from panic. The kind that leaks when you realize a secret you once signed off on has slipped out of your control. Jasmine looked up, finally, and met his stare. There was no fury in her eyes, only evidence. You signed this, she said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even an accusation. It was a eulogy. The second page she slid beneath the document. Cam was an email thread, heavily redacted except for a reply address. Trump Intuitive Global. Net. A domain known by 3 intelligence agencies for routing traffic through overseas proxies. The message body was brief. If Crockett keeps pushing, initiate the Vineyard backup. Time-stamped. 2:12 a.m. Eastern. Dated 2 days before her office received the giving tree. The screen flickered. Someone in the back row gasped. Trump muttered, "You can't prove I sent that." Jasmine didn't look at him. She tapped once more on her tablet. Behind her, the main screen flickered again, and there it was, a digital fingerprint, the metadata hash from the original email, authenticated by an independent Swiss security lab, unedited, time-stamped, geo-locked, Mar-a-Lago. 3:14 a.m. Trump turned to his attorney, whispered too loudly, "We need to stop this, now." The attorney whispered back, "We're past that." Chairman Johnson adjusted his glasses. "Congresswoman Crockett, where did you obtain—" But Jasmine cut in gently. "From a girl who disappeared." Gasps again, this time heavier, fuller. Not from surprise, but from grief. And that's when the weight of the hearing shifted. This wasn't just about Trump anymore. It was about all the voices that had been buried in silence, and the one woman who chose not to blink. 12:49 p.m. She closed the folder, tapped the mic. "You tried to remove me," she said, voice steady. "But I came here with more than words. I came with names, and we're just getting started." C-SPAN's feed flickered as the document cam caught the top edge of the page. Viewers at home saw it, just for a moment, before the screen darkened and the words were pulled from view. But the internet had already moved faster than the censors. Redacted lines, ink slashes like bullet wounds across entire paragraphs. But one sentence, center-aligned and untouched, burned itself into the feed. Do not allow Crockett near financial files. If breached, proceed with obstruction protocol. It was dry, bureaucratic, a footnote in most people's eyes. But to those who understood the coded language of intelligence memos, it was an execution order wearing a suit. In under 20 minutes, the phrase was trending on Twitter, Mastodon, and Truth Social under 3 different hashtags. Journalists whispered behind cupped hands. C-SPAN's chat stream crashed. One post alone read, "Obstruction protocol? That's not political strategy. That's a hit list in legal language." Chairman Mike Johnson blinked twice, then leaned into the microphone. His tone, once stern and dismissive, now trembled with the weight of something he couldn't quite name. "Congresswoman Crockett," he asked carefully, "where did you get this document?" The room held its breath. Jasmine didn't hesitate. She turned her head, just enough to let the overhead lights frame her jawline in iron. Then came her answer, not shouted, not dramatic. Just 5 words wrapped in a detonator's calm. "Not where," she said. "Who?" Silence. But not the comfortable kind. The kind that makes walls lean in. The kind that makes people pray they're not next. Trump straightened in his seat. His cufflinks clicked against the polished oak table. For the first time all morning, he looked, not at Jasmine, but at the gallery behind her. His eyes scanned the rows, like a man trying to guess which ghost had decided to come back. And that's when she did it. Jasmine turned slowly toward the witness bench. She tapped the mic twice, not to adjust it, but to control the tempo. Then she said a name the chamber hadn't heard in months, but the country hadn't forgotten. "Evelyn Torres." The words dropped like glass on tile. Gasps, audible. A reporter in the 3rd row dropped their pen. Chairman Johnson's eyebrows narrowed. "I'm sorry, who did you just say?" Jasmine didn't repeat herself. She didn't need to, because the name itself carried weight. Evelyn Torres, the 21-year-old congressional intern who vanished 2 months ago after filing a sealed ethics complaint. Disappeared without trace. No statement, no investigation. Just gone. The story had gone quiet. Too quiet. Until now. From the far end of the chamber, a young woman stood. The room turned. All of it. Slim, pale, visibly shaken, sunglasses tucked into a blazer sleeve, a folder clutched to her chest like a life vest. She stepped forward without being summoned, without a single word spoken in permission. Security moved to intercept. Jasmine raised one hand. "She's expected." Johnson hesitated. "Do you have authorization?" But the woman answered first, voice trembling, but alive. "I have clearance." She held up her DOJ ID badge. Issued, active. The name, Evelyn R. Torres. Trump flinched. Not a twitch. A full-body jolt. Jasmine didn't smile. She simply leaned back and let the storm walk in. Evelyn reached the center floor. Her hands shook as she opened the folder. Inside, a printed screenshot. She lifted it with care and placed it beneath the document cam. It was an internal memo. Marked Confidential, Internal Ventures Operations. Stamped with a watermark from a private server linked to Trump International Ventures. The title read, "More, Phase 2, Containment Through Narrative Collapse." And below it, a list of initials. 5 names redacted, 1 left untouched, E.T., Evelyn Torres. "I was listed as an internal asset," she said, voice breaking slightly. "They thought I'd follow orders. Instead, I made copies." Trump stood. "This is a lie," he began. But Jasmine cut him off, not with volume, but with precision. "If it's a lie, then why is the server that created it still active, under your son's login credentials?" Trump's mouth froze mid-syllable. Evelyn stepped back. Her task was done. The evidence, printed and digital, now lived in public record. Jasmine turned back toward the committee and lowered her voice. "More wasn't a policy. It was a program, built to silence oversight, designed to make people like me disappear without noise." She let that hang in the air, heavy, unapologetic, and then looking directly into the lens of the C-SPAN broadcast, "But I didn't disappear, and now neither will the truth." 12:57 p.m. Operation Moray was no longer buried. It had a name, a file, a face, and it had just testified under oath. The room was still reeling when the door creaked open. Not the public entrance, but a small access point near the rear, typically used by staffers or legal observers. Heads turned, slowly at first, then all at once. What entered wasn't the next witness. It was a ghost in gray wool. A woman, tall despite her age, stepped through the threshold wearing a long, gray trench coat that looked like it had crossed decades. Her steps were deliberate, slowed by the cane in her left hand, but her eyes, icy blue and sharpened by years of watching power lie, scanned the room like radar. In her right hand, she carried a single folder, unbuckled, labeled in crisp black lettering, Intel Harris. Whispers spread like sparks in dry grass. Jasmine's expression didn't change, but her fingers curled against the edge of her desk as if bracing for impact. Trump narrowed his eyes. The name meant something to him. That much was clear. His lawyer leaned forward, whispered quickly. Too quickly. The woman reached the witness microphone. She didn't wait to be sworn in, didn't ask permission to speak. She simply looked directly at Chairman Johnson and said, "My name is Miriam Castile, former translator, National Security Agency. Clearance level, Gamma Black, retired in 2016, reinstated temporarily under Emergency Statute 721B. The chamber fell silent again, not from confusion, but awe. That level of clearance wasn't just high. It was the kind reserved for intelligence ghosts, the kind that listened when the world thought no one was. Her hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder. A brief moment of frailty, but her voice didn't waver when she spoke. In March of this year, I intercepted a call between two former federal contractors, previously attached to what we now know as Trump International Ventures. She paused, looking up, scanning the room. The call was encrypted through 3 layers of burner proxies. The origin was Palm Beach, Florida. Destination, Zurich. She pulled out a transcript and placed it under the document cam. The screen came to life again. The first line, time-stamped 2:31 MS. The money moved faster than she did. A second line spoken by a second male voice. She'll make noise, but if she leaks anything before the vineyard plan's active, we cut her out. Trump shot up from his chair. This is madness. He barked, his voice no longer confident but cracking with something else. Urgency, maybe even desperation. This woman isn't even authorized to be here. She's been retired for nearly a decade. Miriam didn't flinch. She turned her head toward him with all the patience of someone who'd waited long enough. No, Mr. Trump, she said calmly, surgically. This isn't madness. This is memory. The line hit like a bell, sharp, inevitable, reverberating. She turned back to the committee. I may be old, but my ears still work, and I know what I heard. They weren't just planning to discredit Congresswoman Crockett. They were preparing a containment narrative, tailored, rehearsed, deployable. Chairman Johnson cleared his throat. Ms. Castile, can you verify the audio's authenticity? She nodded. The audio was passed to NSA's Cyber Integrity Division. 3 independent labs ran voice print verification against known voice logs from both speakers. One of those voices matched a former senior advisor to the Trump campaign, now working in a private role with TIV. Name? Johnson asked. Miriam hesitated, then gave it. Graham Kepler. A gasp, audible. Jasmine's eyes didn't waver. She knew that name. Kepler had vanished from public view a year ago. Rumors had him living in the Caymans, consulting for private wealth protection. Now he was in Zurich, orchestrating financial flows and whispering threats over secure lines. Miriam continued. The second voice hasn't been formally confirmed, but NSA algorithms show a 92.3% probability match. With Donald Trump Jr., Trump clenched his jaw. That's baseless, he muttered, but he wasn't shouting anymore. Miriam nodded slightly. That's what I thought too. So I pulled the metadata from the satellite log. It pinged through an uplink registered to a security contractor hired for a private event, hosted 3 days after that call, at your Mar-a-Lago estate. She stepped back from the mic. The folder remained open. The transcript, the metadata, the encrypted routing trail, every piece of it left behind like breadcrumbs through the darkness. Jasmine spoke then, softly but clearly. "So let's be very clear," she said, scanning the committee. "We're not talking about dirty donations or misfiled forms. We're talking about coordinated obstruction, about black budget communication channels used to erase oversight, to erase people." Her eyes turned slowly, deliberately, toward Trump. "To erase me?" 12:59 p.m. In less than 20 minutes, a girl who vanished had returned, a spy no one expected had spoken, and a conspiracy that once lived in shadow now had documents, voices, coordinates, and names. Trump didn't yell this time. He didn't move. He just sat there, hand pressed to the bridge of his nose, staring down at the table like it might offer him an exit. But there were no exits now, because Miriam Castile, a woman who once listened to the world's most dangerous secrets, had just turned the volume up on every lie he thought would never be heard. Jasmine's fingers moved with the steadiness of someone not rushing toward truth, but guiding it, like a surgeon revealing layer by layer what others had buried. She tapped once on her tablet. No theatrics, no warning. The wall screen behind her chair blinked. And then, the money trail lit up. A black background, red arrows, a digital artery of transactions moving faster than the human eye could trace. From a shell firm in Nassau, to a blind trust in Dubai, to a bank that didn't officially exist. The screen froze at the endpoint, a glowing white dot pulsing over an unnamed entity. No staff, no phone number, no SWIFT registration, no tax filings, no board members. And yet, a server log existed. Location tag, Mar-a-Lago, private router, sublevel 1 timestamp, 3:14 a.m., February 20th. The room didn't gasp. It exhaled, like a building finally realizing it had been sitting on dynamite. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. "Who's up at 3:14 a.m. moving money through a ghost bank?" She let the question hang, the kind of silence that chokes, that accuses without needing evidence, because the evidence is still glowing on the screen. Trump didn't answer. He didn't even pretend to look surprised. His hands clasped on the desk, the fingers whitening. But it was his lawyer who blinked, a thin man with slick hair and a colder reputation than even Trump's. He leaned over once, whispered something into Trump's ear. Too fast, too tight. Trump didn't respond, didn't nod. And then the lawyer stood, gathered his papers, and left. No explanation, no excuse. Just exit. Cameras whirled to follow him, but he was already gone, like he knew what was coming next and refused to be seen on tape when it landed. Chairman Johnson shifted in his chair. "Congresswoman, could you clarify?" But Jasmine didn't let him finish. "The bank is registered as Seaside Trade and Holdings," she said, tapping again. The name appeared on screen in dull gray text. "Except it isn't registered anywhere that matters. Not in the U.S., not offshore. It's not in Panama, not in the Caymans. The only place it exists is inside that server." She pointed to the lower corner of the chart, where a metadata trail flickered. MAC address, Trump MGMT RT01. Another tab. The screen split. Left side, routing codes and timestamps. Right side, a digital invoice. Transfer amount, $8,000. Origin, DGS PAC, Delaware. Destination, Seaside Trade and Holdings. Purpose, asset acquisition authorized by signature initials, DJT Jr. A collective breath sucked out of the chamber. Fox's cameras tilted. CNN's red light flared. Even the stenographer paused. Trump's jaw clenched. He hadn't blinked since the screen lit up. Jasmine moved in for the strike. Not cruelly, not vengefully, but with the kind of clinical grace that only someone deeply tired of lies can summon. "Let me make this plain," she said, voice even. "This wasn't money laundering the old way. This was digital laundering. This wasn't hiding cash under a shell company. It was building a shell company that only lives on a router, that moves money, leaves no paperwork, and vanishes with a keystroke." She circled one final item on the screen. IP activity log, last login, February 20th, 3:14 a.m. user, DT rootedmin. That was it. The mic didn't need to drop. It just stopped being needed. Trump finally leaned forward, but not to speak, to breathe, slowly, like every inhale had to be negotiated with reality. Chairman Johnson spoke again. Congresswoman, do you have corroboration on this? Jasmine nodded once. The logs were pulled by a third-party forensic team out of Zurich. They mirrored the drive 2 days after the first whistleblower file hit my office. They've signed an affidavit. It's already in the record. She looked up, not at Johnson, at the public, at the millions watching. You can say what you want about my tone, my skin, my seat, she said. But this isn't politics. This is evidence. This is your money. This is your country. Trump opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. Not this time. Because how do you deny a paper trail when the ink is still drying beneath your son's login credentials? And somewhere in the quiet that followed, a new question began to rise. Not from Jasmine, not from Johnson, not from the cameras, but from the American people themselves. How many more of these ghost banks are out there? And how many politicians are using them to stay invisible? The screen dimmed, the bank vanished, but the memory didn't. Because a non-existent bank just told the truth louder than 1,000 microphones ever could. Then came the case no one expected. Jasmine's voice dropped to a whisper, not for theatrics, but reverence. Exhibit D, she said, her tone almost too quiet for the mic. Yet the entire chamber leaned in, like truth had decided to whisper instead of roar. The screen behind her flickered, this time no charts, no flow diagrams, just a single name centered in white text on a black background. Evelyn Torres, missing 21 years old, former congressional intern, assigned briefly to the subcommittee on financial oversight. She'd vanished 3 weeks ago during a political conference in Florida. No witnesses, no phone pings, no public search warrant, no national coverage. Just gone, as if she never existed. Until now. Jasmine tapped the screen once more, and Evelyn's last known message appeared. Extracted from a wiped phone, Jasmine's forensic team recovered using a recovery agent based in Estonia. Time-stamped, 1:27 a.m., March 4th. A single sentence, typed in haste, words trembling with urgency. If anything happens, tell Congresswoman Crockett it's buried in the vineyard. The room broke open like glass, not from noise but from recoil, like everyone suddenly realized they were sitting on top of something too big to name. Jasmine's eyes didn't leave the screen. She tapped again. This time an image filled the monitors. Grainy, infrared, pulled from a drone scan hovering just above Trump's private estate in Palm Beach. The shot was angled downward, aimed beneath the back veranda. It showed a soft soil disruption directly beneath what records identified as the Mar-a-Lago wine cellar. Superimposed on the image, thermal signature, 6.6 to 3 inches. Metallic core, partially shielded. Depth, 17.8 inches, match probability, 94. 6%, portable solid-state drive. A buried drive, hidden beneath a vineyard. Under a cellar that had no surveillance logs for that night. The chairman gripped the edges of his desk. Jasmine's voice remained calm. Evelyn called it the vineyard. That wasn't metaphor. That was GPS. She turned finally to face Trump directly. Do you remember, Mr. Trump, what was scheduled at your estate the night Evelyn disappeared? Trump didn't answer, but the cameras captured the twitch at his jaw, the narrowing of his pupils, the way his hands balled into silent fists. Jasmine continued. A private tasting, according to the guest list. 12 people, all cleared, no names logged, no press allowed. She tapped the tablet again. A still frame froze on the screen. It showed Evelyn Torres, blurry but recognizable, entering the Mar-a-Lago gates in a black jacket and carrying a messenger bag, a security badge clipped to her belt. It was the last time she was seen alive, until today. Because behind the room's silence came the click of a door at the far end of the hearing chamber. And then, Evelyn walked in. The room broke. Not with applause, not with sound, with stillness. Like the very idea of movement might break the spell. Thinner, pale, but walking tall. She approached the mic, eyes forward, shoulders shaking slightly but held high. The cameras zoomed as if summoned by instinct. Jasmine stepped back. Evelyn spoke. I was supposed to disappear. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. I was told the project was political misdirection. I didn't know it was laundering. I didn't know it was treason. She opened her bag, pulled out a drive in a sealed static-proof pouch, handed it to the clerk. On it, the raw logs, audio, files, routing data, and the original memo she'd extracted from an unsecured terminal deep in the estate's underground office. The chairman asked, "Ms. Torres, can you verify the source?" "Yes," she said. The drive was handed to me by a TIV staffer who said, and I quote, "Make sure this never sees sunlight." Jasmine stepped forward again, her voice a shade deeper. "And who gave that staffer the order?" Evelyn didn't blink. She raised her head and said the name, "Donald Trump Jr." Trump stood, not in outrage, but in reflex, like a man watching the future collapse inward. Jasmine leaned toward her mic. And there it is, 1:06 p.m. The girl who vanished hadn't just come back. She brought the kind of truth that doesn't just hurt reputations, it erodes dynasties. Because when you bury a drive in a vineyard under a private estate and a girl climbs back out, you don't just lose control of the narrative. You lose the right to write the ending. Jasmine reached down, opened a slim black folder, and unfolded a sheet of paper with gloved precision. No flourish, just gravity. The kind of weight a person feels when holding something that shouldn't exist, yet now exists in front of the entire country. She placed it under the document cam. The title at the top of the transcript was stamped with two seals, one from the Department of Justice, the other from the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Centered beneath them, a single line in bold, transcript, audio capture, case ref, 894 XK Tiva. The screen behind her illuminated with black text on white, sparse, cold, almost sterile, like the truth had been vacuum-packed to preserve it. And then, Trump, VO. Crockett won't be a problem. I've got justices, deals, and distractions. Let them chase smoke. For a split second, no one breathed. The words hung like smoke themselves, curling, invisible but choking. The sentence didn't need context. It was the context. A plan, a strategy, a confession. Spoken casually, almost amused. But the smoke had a name, and she was standing in the room. Jasmine didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her head. She simply tapped once more on her tablet, and the next line of the transcript appeared. Unknown male. If she makes it to oversight, it's too late. Trump. She won't. We own the calendar. We stall until she drowns. Across the room, Trump sat motionless, but his complexion shifted, slowly draining of color, like someone being drained from the inside out. His eyes didn't meet anyone else's. He looked at the screen like it had betrayed him personally. Chairman Johnson leaned in, his voice cautious. Congresswoman Crockett, are you confirming the authenticity of this recording? Jasmine answered without hesitation. The audio was collected under a sealed FISA warrant, submitted by a DOJ agent working parallel to a broader financial crimes investigation. The voice print was verified by 3 agencies, including the FBI's own Speech Analysis Division. She tapped again. A waveform graph appeared, blue lines overlaying orange. The match percentage 98.7% labeled Speaker A, Donald John Trump, confirmed. And then her voice dropped, low, level, but sharp enough to pierce concrete. This isn't a theory. This isn't a rumor. This is a former president caught orchestrating obstruction, manipulating judicial influence, and referring to a sitting member of Congress as a problem to be delayed, discredited, or drowned. She looked up directly into the camera, into millions of living rooms. I was the smoke he wanted you to chase, but now I am the fire. Gasps, a few from the gallery, a few from behind the panel. One senator muttered something under his breath and scribbled furiously onto a legal pad. Trump finally stood, gripping the edge of his desk like it might anchor him to reality. He opened his mouth to respond, but what came out was incomplete. A low growl, not speech, friction. His attorney, one of the two who hadn't fled, rose beside him, tried to whisper something urgent. Trump waved him off. And then, louder than he should have, that transcript is fake. You people fabricate everything. Jasmine stared at him, not with anger, with recognition, like someone who had memorized every move before he made it. "Then let's play it," she said, and the room stilled again. A technician at the side wall tapped a console, speakers engaged, and for the next 47 seconds, America listened. Not to pundits, not to politicians, but to Trump himself, speaking behind closed doors, never intended for daylight. "She's noise, disrupt her, leak something, or bring out the thing we discussed. Doesn't have to be true, just loud. We don't need truth, we need delay. You handle the court, I'll handle the story." When the audio stopped, it was followed by something far louder than a gavel. Silence. The kind that made walls sweat. Jasmine stepped forward, not triumphant, not theatrical, but ready. "There is a moment in every lie," she said, voice soft, "when the liar realizes they've been heard. Not suspected, not debated. Heard. This is that moment." And then she turned to Trump. "You wanted me gone. You bet your empire on my silence. You used your voice to weaponize delay. So now I've used yours to dismantle denial." 1:12 p.m. The transcript now sat burned into the congressional record. The audio lived on 100 news servers. The waveform, the metadata, the match, already mirrored by journalists across 3 continents. And Trump? He finally sat back down. But this time he didn't smirk, didn't shout, didn't blink. Because the voice that once commanded rooms had just convicted itself. Then, when the room thought it had seen every crack, every leak, another voice arrived. Not from inside the chamber, not from the bench, but from above. A new screen descended from the ceiling with a soft, mechanical hum, followed by the C-SPAN feed splitting down the middle. On one side, Jasmine Crockett, standing like the final act of defiance. On the other, a satellite connection flickering into life. And then, clearer than anyone expected, Letitia James, Attorney General of New York, came into frame. Dressed in navy, lit by the soft light of a government briefing room, she did not blink. She did not smile. She didn't need to. Her voice cut with surgical calm. "This is Letitia James. I confirm the authenticity of the documents presented in this chamber." The room tensed. Jasmine didn't turn. She stood still, allowing the feed to speak for itself. "My office received the materials 7 weeks ago," James continued, "via a secure channel from an anonymous federal source. We began preliminary validation immediately. But before we could move forward, a federal injunction, unusual in timing and suspicious in jurisdiction, was filed to suppress the contents. That order, we now know, came from a judge with a direct financial link to Trump International Ventures." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Several members of Congress murmured. One aide stumbled to his feet and rushed out the back. Cameras rotated on remote arms. The public gallery sat frozen, a sea of held breath and wide eyes. Letitia James leaned slightly forward. "That is political interference, but the people have a right to know, especially when the truth is under threat from the very top." Behind her, the feed showed another image, an official DOJ stamp over the words, "Fraudulent structures, undeclared accounts, multinational deception." 3 phrases, 6 years of corruption, one family name behind all of it. Jasmine finally spoke again, not loud, just steady. "You blocked her truth, buried her warnings, buried her name. You tried to bury mine too." Trump sat statue still. No notes in front of him. No counsel at his side now. Both attorneys had left. His lips moved slightly as if rehearsing a line he no longer believed would land. Jasmine's voice grew firmer. "But we have memory. We have documents. We have signatures. And now we have federal confirmation from one of the few institutions left that hasn't been bought, bullied, or broken." James nodded on screen once. The camera feed shimmered slightly, then returned to full resolution. "To the Oversight Committee, to the American people watching now, I say this: truth delayed is damage multiplied. The longer we've waited to expose this web of laundering and obstruction, the deeper its roots have wrapped around our systems. But this isn't just about criminality. It's about betrayal. And betrayal wears a suit just like anyone else." Jasmine turned back to the bench. "We've seen the documents, heard the voice, traced the money, dug up the buried truth, and now we know what it costs. She tapped the table once more. So I asked this chamber, what does silence cost you? Silence now, not from fear, from confrontation. Even the critics didn't move. Even the cameras didn't cut. Trump opened his mouth again, but still no words. Because for the first time in his public life, there was no room left for spin. And then something unexpected happened. One member of the majority side, an older senator who had remained silent through all prior hearings, removed his lapel pin and set it on the table. Slowly, deliberately. Then another followed. One by one, symbols of loyalty began to fall. Because when truth lands, when smoke clears, when even the ghosts come back to testify, silence isn't neutrality, it's complicity. And on that day, silence finally fell. Not as defense, but as surrender. Chairman Mike Johnson banged the gavel, twice hard. Order, he shouted, voice cracking against the walls. Order in the chamber. But order was no longer his to command, because the room wasn't listening. It was moving, shifting, awakening. On the central monitors, the C-SPAN feed fractured and reformed, replaced now by something colder, sharper, decisive. A digital vote tally, real time, pulsing red and green, one block at a time. Motion 12B, immediate subpoena of former President Donald J. Trump. Vote in progress. No, 189. Yes, 228, then 229, then 231. The chamber gasped as the final count locked in. Yes, 241, no, 192, including 9 Republican crossovers. 9 who had seen enough. 9 who blinked as the smoke cleared and realized the fire wasn't partisan. It was radioactive. Chairman Johnson looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. He whispered something to his clerk, but even his own voice seemed to have deserted him. Cameras turned, so did every head in the room. Donald Trump stood, his face frozen. Not angry, not even surprised. Just rigid. Like something deep inside had snapped, and he didn't know if it was fight or flight. He tugged his jacket, or straightened his tie, then said, with the arrogance of someone who'd never heard no from a building before, I'm walking out. The sentence echoed, not defiant, desperate. He stepped back from the table, but before he could move another inch, another figure stood, Jasmine Crockett. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. No, Mr. Trump, she said. You signed the orders. Now you answer for them. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was finality. Trump glanced to his left, expecting his detail to escort him, but they didn't move. He looked to the Capitol Police at the far side of the room, and they, slowly, stepped aside, not to clear a path for him, but to clear one for her. Jasmine walked forward slowly past the benches, past the desk where he once sat like a king returned from exile. Her heels tapped on the marble like a metronome measuring the fall of an empire. She stopped just a few feet from him. He towered over her, but somehow, he looked smaller. The kind of small that only happens when power evaporates in real time. She looked him in the eye, not with rage, not even with satisfaction, with obligation. You said I was smoke, she said softly, but it turns out I was the match. He said nothing. Jasmine nodded once to the sergeant-at-arms, and in a historic break from protocol, for the first time in modern U.S. history, a former president was served with a congressional subpoena on the floor, under live television, in front of a full bipartisan panel, and without immunity. It was 1:19 p.m. No confetti, no music, just the soft sound of paper sliding across oak, and history being rewritten not by a headline, but by a woman they tried to silence, who made truth louder than every lie in the room. Jasmine Crockett approached the podium for the final time. There were no more objections, no more interruptions, no more exits left for the guilty. She didn't reach for the microphone as if she needed to control it. She picked it up like someone lifting a torch in a dark hallway. Not for drama, for legacy. She looked out, not at the cameras, but past them, into the eyes of every American who had ever been told that the system was too rigged, too high, too guarded to challenge. Into every living room where truth had been replaced with volume. Into every soul that had ever been labeled the problem. They called me the problem, she began. Her voice wasn't loud. It was full. But problems expose what the powerful want to bury. Problems don't vanish. They expand. They force truth to leak through cracks no one planned for. The room didn't move. It didn't dare to. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the envelope. The envelope. Red stamped. Sealed. The first spark of everything that followed. She held it like it weighed more than paper, because it did. This, she said, was supposed to erase me. She turned it to face the room, the cameras, the world. Instead, it revealed you. Then she opened it. The seal cracked like the spine of history breaking open. Inside, she held one final document, unredacted, unfiltered, and unsealed. She didn't read it. She didn't have to. Instead, she looked up. This envelope taught me something, she said. Power doesn't rot in silence. It rots when it stops being questioned. A pause, then. And today we didn't just question it. We stripped it naked. We found its paperwork. We followed its money. And we listened to it lie. She laid the envelope down. Not discarded. Delivered. This chamber was never meant to protect the powerful from consequences. It was built to protect the people from power unaccounted for. She looked directly at Trump, now sitting still, jaw locked, like he couldn't unhear what the world now knew. You told the world I was too loud. But I was never loud. I was clear. And clarity doesn't apologize for making noise. The lights in the room didn't flicker, but something deeper did. Something structural. In a single moment, millions watching didn't just see a witness or a woman. They saw something rare, undeniable. A system turned inside out by the voice they tried to cancel, and the frame they tried to control broken, by the very person they underestimated. At 1:22 p.m., Jasmine stepped away from the podium. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just walked out. And as she passed the Capitol Police, they didn't block her path. They saluted it. Sometimes the loudest voice in a room isn't the one that shouts, but the one that refuses to stay silent when truth is inconvenient. Power fears clarity because it cannot outshout it. And courage isn't always a roar. Sometimes it's a woman standing alone, holding a paper that was meant to destroy her, and using it to rebuild something better. May we all be that brave when our name is called. If this story shook something in you, don't scroll. Sit with it, share it, speak on it, like, comment, and send it to someone who still believes truth should terrify power. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where silence gets subpoenaed. Hit the bell. The next chapter might indict your comfort. This is a fictional dramatization, rooted in real tactics, real erasure, and real resistance. Any resemblance to actual people or events is coincidental or necessary. Thanks for watching. Justice isn't polite, it's earned. This is Harrison Stories.